We all are bringing our own things that have happened for us in childhood, how our parents were with us. Maybe we have our own anxiety we're trying to manage. We also need to be able to navigate that and be able to maybe get support from someone around what is coming up for us as we go through the process and what might get in our way in order to be successful.
Today I am speaking with Julianne Reilly, and she is in Washington, D.C., United States area. And she works with parents and teachers alike. She's a positive discipline educator, trainer, and she also is a counselor, therapist. So I will let Julianne talk about her journey. And most importantly, she's also a mama, just like me. So welcome to Now What podcast with Yogi Patel. And today we're going to just talk a lot about anxiety and other topics as it comes up. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. As you mentioned, I'm a clinical social worker by training. I was a teacher before that, and I became really passionate about supporting kids, from early on when I was babysitting, when I was a young teenager, and I knew I wanted to work with kids and adolescents. So I went into teaching, and then through that, I really wanted to do more support around mental health and the social emotional world of kids. And so I became a clinical social worker. I've worked primarily in schools for many years, and I now am also working privately, seeing a lot of parents and caregivers and just supporting them through all of the normal challenges that come along with caring for children, and also some of the more challenging moments that involve bigger things like more severe anxiety and other challenges that can come into play along the way. And yes, I'm a mom to 2 kids myself. And so I've had lots of opportunity and will continue to have lots of opportunity to practice all of this imperfectly as a parent myself. And so I use a lot of that as opportunities to really reflect on what I'm supporting other parents through and how challenging it can be for myself, even with all of that knowledge.
What a great point that even though we learn a lot, or we might be in the profession of supporting others, we're not challenge-free. So no one is alone in their journey of things that happen in raising children or working with children. Mm-hmm. However, we know it's the most important position any person could hold is to have the pleasure of being around younger friends. And thank you for being here today. And we're going to get right into a lot of conversation today, particularly you and I both have common interest of Positive Discipline by Dr. Jane Nelson and Lynn Lott, their first book that took off. And now we have trainings for teachers, parents, leaders, and many more. We both work with a variety of different theorists. We put a lot of other work into our beliefs and systems that we use. In your case, you just added something called space. And I'm not really familiar too well besides the conversations we've had. Can you tell us a little bit more about what space is?
Space is a evidence-based model that is about treating childhood anxiety, but primarily by working with the parents and caregivers and other adults, who are in that child or adolescent's life. As I said, it's been a well-researched model. It was developed by a man named Elie Leibovitz out of the Yale Child Study Center. It really is based on this idea of nonviolent resistance and Haim Omar's work around nonviolent resistance. And I can dig in a little more about what that means. It's really been a fascinating journey for me to learn about, because so often I work with a lot of kids and teens who struggle with anxiety, both what we call like the little a anxiety, which is just normal anxiety we all have to manage throughout our lives. And then we like to say like the big A anxiety, when it becomes kind of this thing that is impacting your life so significantly that it's interfering with daily life. But that's something that I think shows up in my work most often. If people are saying like, what do you see kind of in your office, both at school and outside of school, most commonly? And it's some range of relation to anxiety. And so often parents struggle or caregivers struggle to get those kids in the door to more support, to therapy, to more intensive therapy if needed, even if they can. Unless parents or caregivers or whoever are the adults who are most involved in that child's life are getting support around how to interact with their child related to the anxiety, some of that treatment is not always as successful as it could be. what space really does is support parents in understanding the anxiety in the first place and like what is actually happening under the surface for their child or adolescent. And then how do they actually engage with it? How do they respond to their child in those moments of anxiety? And then how are some of their behavior maybe exacerbating the problem and or really supporting their child and helping them learn to tolerate it? One thing that we talk about a lot is, a bunch of my colleagues and I talk about this, is that I think our field of mental health has sometimes done a disservice in making people think that like getting therapy is about making anxiety go away, right? Is like kind of smoothing everything over, having people feel better, when really it's really the work that we're doing in space and that I hope we're continuing to do in any other forum is helping people learn to tolerate anxiety, right? We all are going to experience it. Every single one of us are going to experience some level of anxiety. It's actually really beneficial in some moments, right? So like before you take a test, it's good to feel some anxiety. Maybe it isn't pleasant, right? But it's actually going to help you really know like, okay, I've got to study for that test. It's going to get you motivated to make sure you're prepared, to make sure you're really focused on what needs to happen before a big soccer game, before you go on stage. A certain level of anxiety is really important. If you get in a fight with a friend and you need to repair it with them, right? Like, of course, you're going to feel a little bit of anxiety around that. And sometimes it can become so big, right, that it, like I said, it can interfere with things. And sometimes as parents and caregivers in loving adults in our children's and adolescents' lives, we start to jump in and kind of try to protect our kids from that feeling, right? We might participate in helping them avoid something or try to kind of smooth it over or do it for them, or on the other hand, dismiss some of those feelings that they're having. And so those are some of the times where we are trying to help them, right? We're coming from this wonderful place of loving and caring, and it can often make the problem worse. So an example of that might be, I use the example of your child is afraid at night in the house, right? They're afraid to go to bed at night because maybe they're afraid someone's going to break in the house. As a loving parent, you might say like, don't worry, the police station's right down the street. I locked all the doors. We've got a dog who will bark. And all of those sound totally reasonable to kind of reassure the child that they're going to be okay. When actually what it might be doing is kind of reinforcing the idea that there is something to be afraid of, right? So like instead the child's like, oh my gosh, we live near a police station. My parents checked the locks because maybe they're afraid someone really might break in. We got this big dog, right? And so it's actually reinforcing some of that when in reality, it's not really about like kind of the content. It's about helping the child learn that, yes, sometimes maybe when I'm laying in bed at night, I feel that thought that pops in my head, like maybe I'm a little scared too. And I can tolerate that feeling, right? That that I can handle the feeling that's there. So a lot of the work that we do with parents in spaces around understanding what happens when anxiety shows up, how can it present? And we could talk more about that. And then how do we actually engage with it in a way that's going to be helpful for our kids to tolerate it more? And in the end, right, when we know that we can tolerate something, it doesn't feel so big, right? If we know we can handle something, it doesn't feel so big and overwhelming. And that's really the goal. And so we talk with parents about how do they respond supportively, and we teach them about what that means within the context of space. And then we also talk with parents about how do they look at the accommodations they're making for the anxiety that might be actually having a negative effect. And then how do we start to kind of pull back and start reducing those accommodations? And so those are different ways of how we start to engage, but it's a process that we go through with parents.
Is this something that is done one-on-one? Parents reach out to folks in space. How do they find individuals that are in their area?
You can. There's a lot of therapists all over the country and the world who are using space. There is a website for space treatment. I think it's spacetreatment.net. And if you go there, they do have a list of providers who've been trained and also providers who've gone through additional training and who are certified in space. It's really, if you do it kind of in full, it's a 12 or more weekly sessions with a therapist to help coach you through it. That being said, there's a lot of providers out there now who are offering kind of multi-session work groups or workshops to help parents or caregivers understand space a little bit more and get a little bit of individualized support around it but really be able, then the parents can kind of work through it on their own. Ellie Lieberitz wrote a wonderful book that is based in space. It's sort of giving parents a guide so they understand more of it. And so for some parents, that might be enough, right? To be able to participate in a group or read the book and get the ideas and the philosophy and start kind of employing it on their own. For other parents who have kind of a more complex situation, maybe that their child is avoiding school and it's become pretty significant, or maybe there's some aggression at play or other kind of more significant things that are going on, they might want to have some more individualized support, because sometimes going through this process can be really tricky. And we also bring our own stuff to the table, right? We all are bringing our own, maybe things that have happened for us in childhood, how our parents were with us. Maybe we have our own anxiety we're trying to manage. And so we also need to be able to navigate that and be able to maybe get support from someone around what is coming up for us as we go through the process and what might get in our way in order to be successful. So it really just depends from person to person on what's going to be helpful.
Perfect examples. And one that comes to mind for me is preparing children for starting school, right? So we get all excited about first day of school and you're going to go and you're going to have fun. And then, this anxiety creeps in. For some children, that anxiety lasts for a very, very long time. And for some, it's easily, they're anxious for the first week or so, and then they tend to adapt. If you like the content of this video, please don't forget to follow. And also, if you want more information, visit the website, yogipateltte.com.